Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know that it's been a long day, and hopefully you've learned a lot today, and thank you again for coming. I just have one announcement before our speaker. We are going to be doing door prizes after Zachary Bennett gives his talk. So if you want a door prize, just hang in here until after that. And so we're going to go ahead and get started today. So this is our last presentation of the day, and the title is The Power of Place. And our speaker for this last plenary of the day is Zachary Benedict. Zachary Benedict is a managing partner at MKM Architecture plus Design in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a firm that has been consistently recognized as one of the top 100 healthcare architecture firms in the country by Modem Healthcare magazine. While designing numerous projects ranging from senior care facilities to public libraries, Zachary manages the firm's community-based projects and research efforts. His presentation will explain the challenges facing our growing older adult population, limitations often imposed by the built environment, and how the way in which we understand and develop a sense of place is essential to how we measure a quality of life. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Zachary Benedict. You want to give him a hand?
Thank you. Can you hear me? In the back? Yes? Yes? Okay. Thank you. They moved the door prizes to the end so you'd stay and listen to me. Because I know I'm the only thing between you and a night out in Evansville. I think it's fair to tell you a little about me, even though everything that was said in that intro is true. I am a quintessential mama's boy born in an Indiana town of 800 people who had a single stoplight that turned off at 11 o'clock at night. That's how you knew you missed curfew. I enjoy blues music, used smelly books, and I asked my wife to marry me when I was 13, and she didn't say yes till I was 21. And I doodle buildings for a living. And we're going to talk about that a little today. My real thesis for today is that I think a lot of the rural communities throughout the Midwest are going to, if not already, dealing with the same problems. All of which those cities and towns are not equipped to figure out solutions for said problems. And I think probably a group like this, the people in this room, have a better sensibility of what needs to be done to these cities than the people actually running your cities, in most cases, just between us. And I'll kind of go over what I mean by that, because my goal when I'm talking with groups like this is to give you as much ammunition as possible to riot the streets when you see what you see you know is wrong. Right? The next time you see a suburban development with 107 matching beige number 187 colored homes with two-car garages, you have at least some way of saying, this is idiotic, and we have to figure out a better way. So that's kind of where we're starting this from, okay? My firm, MKM, is dedicated to individual well-being. That's where we spend all of our time and obsession. We are tirelessly trying to pursue the idea of defining and designing meaningful places for people. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we need to learn more. We break up every project in the office in these 4 quadrants based on 2 axes, independence and health. So while every project fits in one of these buckets, community health, outpatient care, acute care, hospitals, or long-term care, we're more interested in the journey through all 4. At some point in someone's life, they tend to go through all 4 of these. And I'm proud to say most of our clients are starting to recognize the fact their goal is to get everybody into that community box again as soon as possible. Right, so we're all at least starting with the same metric of success. It's just defining what that community should look like is maybe what we'll talk about today. I hitting the wrong button? Oh. Yeah. We try to present some of these ideas as much as we can, not because we're proud of them as much as we'd like feedback. They're kind of nebulous ideas, and that's why we're so interested in doing discussions like this. So please, I'll stay as long as you want. If you have questions or concerns or want to say how you think I missed it completely, I'd love to hear that. This is where I spend most of my time, or what we'll call stroller-to-stroller research. What we found is most cities are designed around an able-bodied 25-year-old male egomaniac with a car, right? And we're finding that becoming very problematic for most communities, especially within rural settings. So we spend a lot of our time with these marginalized populations, those on both ends of the bell curve. And what we found is if we can increase the quality of life for these individuals, we tend to inherently increase the quality of life for everyone, whether they like it or not. The difference is this is harder to do, and people don't seem too interested in doing it. But I think this is critical to the sustainability of many communities across the Midwest. So what we're going to talk about today is systemics, kind of the systemic approach to what all this means. That's Malcolm Gladwell with the great hair. And he wrote an interesting book on tipping points where he defined a tipping point as that magic moment when an idea, trend, or social behavior crosses a threshold and spreads like wildfire. And most phenomena through complex social systems tend to spread that way. The difference is we don't tend to, at least at an urban planning level or a city management level, care to talk much about social systems. We care to talk about sewers and gutters and infrastructure. But it's a lot more complex than that. We need to understand that these disruptive singular trends, like a massive aging population, provides a widespread occurrence of an infectious phenomenon. So we're at this kind of tipping point, especially in these rural communities that I'm going to beat on today, that whether you like it or not is going to happen, is going to spread like wildfire. In complex social systems, things tend to move through at about the same rate. This chart looks the same for popular haircut, TV show, Ebola. They all kind of catch on at about the same, they bubble, 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 and then they take off. And they're interesting. You can see a whole slew of different graphs about that. I'm more interested in the counter curve, what happens because of that phenomenon, because that's what we're going to have to deal with. So here's the rise and decline of league bowling in America, key critical information. But I can chart this for any real social activity, and it has a very similar curve. Somewhere in the late 60s, it drops to almost nothing. Because somewhere in the late 60s, we started designing communities that made it really cumbersome to do things like league bowling. Right? Just made it hard, annoying, and not worth the time. The interesting thing about these curves is the counter curve. This is the rise of chronic disease in America. That includes obesity and teenage suicide. Very, very similar counter curve. We found the correlation between these, this idea of creating segmented and isolated and depressing environments, and our behavior. You know, Dan talked a lot this morning about environment, and I couldn't agree more. But it's not only dealing with nutrition or friendship. It's also dealing with a sense of place and a sense of a willingness to accept something different. This is, and everybody's probably seen a version of this chart, this is the number of working age people for every elderly person. Right? And you can see this in a totally different way. We're all getting really old really fast. Right? However you want to say that, or what chart you want to show. The question is, what are we going to do about it, and how we can change it at a systemic level to react to it. It's different in rural and Midwestern communities. Right? That's a national phenomenon, but it's different here. So for instance, our state's population between 2005 and 2040 grows by 15%. It's fairly normal. During that same time, our 65 and older population grows by 90%. In rural communities, those with 25,000 or less, that number is closer to 130%. This is happening quickly because you're burning the candle from both ends. I have brain drain, emerging professionals leaving, not coming back. So all the left get bigger pieces of the pie by default. And then baby boomers hit 65, balloons. We spent a lot of time looking at rural communities. We did a research project a couple years ago where we compiled as much census data as we could on what we called the target cities This is every city in Indiana with populations between 10 and 25,000 people, defined by the state as a rural community. And you start seeing before those trends, before that 130% projection even starts to happen, we're already dealing with a different reality, right? So dark yellow is the national average, state average, target city average. This is percent of population was 65 and older. We're already 25% higher than the state or national average before the 130% increase. We're already dealing with about half of our citizens with a bachelor's degree or higher before the increase. We're dealing with a different kit of parts that make it a much more complex problem, and these communities have no resources to react to it. Uplifting last talk for the day. We'll get there. The other thing a lot of people I don't think realize is how few people actually live in senior care environments. I mean, research ranges from 3 to 5% of the market. Those that are age qualified actually living in age qualified residences. The difference is that's a lot of my clients. I do a lot of work for senior care, CCRCs and the like. And it's a niche market. There's only a certain amount of people willing or affluent enough to provide that kind of care for themselves or their parents. The rest are a different type of person, right? And those are the type Dan was talking about this morning, right? They're a different type altogether. And they're looking for something different. They're defining their identity a little different. And the resources and assistance they'll need and require are much different than what we do with these 3 to 5%. They just are. This is a healthcare problem. That's an urban planning problem. When I show you 130% growth in your 65 and older population, but only 5% are going there, on their best day, say I lie to you and say that number is going to jump from 5 to 10%. I still got 90% over here that I got to deal with a city mentality, right? And the community at large. I have to deal with this. And it changes how we define independence. This is my hero, Carl Fredrickson. The day the Savannah Oaks retirement community came to pick him up. And I show this with this question that I don't like. AARP asks every year, would you really like to stay in your current residence as long as possible? Yeah. Yes. And they'll publish, 87%, 92%. Well, who says no? Now, I'm more worried about the people that said no, that to another human being will admit, I just don't want to stay here. A better question is, what would I have to do to your home for you to stay here? I can actually do something with that information, right? But we constantly ask these questions that I don't think are helping the discussion much. I just finished a concurrent session before this that I won't get into, but we're losing sight of what home means as a phenomenon. And it really is more than just a structure. It's kind of an overlapping reality between the built environment, stuff and things, pop culture and society, and the user group. And all those are constantly changing. The only difference is where they overlap is how we perceive home. Right? This is what I'm not willing to abandon to go to a retirement community. Right? This is what I am willing to relocate 3 states to the east to find and leave your community if I could do this successfully for another 10 years. Right? So these become huge economic questions for communities. The reason is because we're starting to finally acknowledge in economic terms that there's a connection between place and quality of life. 5 years ago, I couldn't say that words like place, attachment, happiness, these are economic terms because that's how people vote with their feet. And as I age, if I get less attached, less happy, less reliant on my place, why am I here? And we have to accept that and understand that we should demand that from our cities, that they have to prioritize this sense of place. So let's talk about it in a system of attachment, because that's really, in a lot of ways, what we're talking about. How can you create and incentivize a system of attachment that engages people of all ages and abilities? This is what we used to call economic development. By today's terms, there's a lot of complications here. Mixed use, you have to get a variance for signage, on-street parking. We've made this really complicated. But what it was an internalized system. You went to a central area to get stuff. Milk, eggs, hammers, gossip, girlfriends. You knew where to go, right? That's where everything happened. And somewhere along the line, we traded this for this, to a destination economy, right? I have to get in my car, go somewhere, get my thing, get back in my car, and go home. We did this under the veil of convenience, right? But the counter curve for this has been so inconvenient, right? The amount of health care, isolation, unhappiness, detachment from the world around you. We've almost completely eliminated the ability to accidentally run into a friend, unless they happen to be buying toilet paper at Walmart at the same time. Right? In one fell swoop, we just said we're not going to run into each other anymore. This is why Mark Zuckerberg is a billionaire. We made him one because he was trying to fix this. And this is what we're having to deal with. This is not a convenience. And it will no longer be a convenience if 20% of our population shouldn't be driving. Or 20% of our millennials who refuse to drive. So we have to understand that this is an issue. Because we get places that look like this. And I always ask the question too, you know, we asked this morning, how many of you walk to school? How many of your kids walk to school? This is what national data will say. Almost all of us, adults, walk to school, 71%. 18% of our children. In one generation, we went from almost everyone to almost no one. And there's a lot of reasons why. That's not the point. The point is we did this out of convenience, and it's highly inconvenient. Right? Not only the example that children walk to school are less likely to be obese, they're highly more likely to score better in their SATs. This isn't just about physical health. Right? The cognitive wayfinding of a 7-year-old that could close his eyes and tell you how to get to his favorite park is gone. We find children don't know how to do that anymore. Right? Because most adults can't tell me how to get to their house. Which beige one is it? Right? There's a phenomenon they call it, it's really making, GPS was the savior of delivery pizza. They had no idea which one's yours. Right? So it's more than just health. Right? Because by walkability standards, if I live there, this is only a quarter mile away. Put in a sidewalk, I'll walk. No, you won't. No, you won't. No one will. You might die. I don't care how well the sidewalk's designed. You might pray for death because that walk would be so miserable. Right? And that's the difference. It's not just a design problem. We've known this forever when it comes to policing populations, right? And they call this human capitalization. It's this idea that children no longer are independent enough to go to school on their own and figure it out by themselves without mom and dad hovering over them. This is defined as human capitalization. The environment allowed me to capitalize on certain skill sets, right? One of the biggest detriments to human capitalization is gang lines. You can track that if a 13-year-old boy has to walk across gang lines to go to school, graduation rates drop below 5%. It's an imaginary line in the sand. But it changes everything. And for every single marginalized population, there's that kind of barrier, real or perceived or imaginary, that if it just disappeared, my capitalization would change. And we can't be shy about defining what those are. Because I think some communities will get it and others won't. Especially, I think, rural communities have a unique niche market to offer people, especially those willing to age in place, of what I think Dan was referring to as a tribal experience this morning, a tight-knit social structure where they can still make a difference, still be independent, still be engaged in a nice, quaint, historic district, right, and make a difference long, long into my lifespan. And those that get it may, in fact, creatively destroy the ones that refuse to. So this term creative destruction, it's like the day we started selling digital cameras, we stopped worrying about making good Polaroid film. We probably could have made it better, it just seemed like a waste of time. Right? And we're starting to see communities understand this, leveraging policy around blue zone strategies or aging in place incentives that are going to attract people from other communities and literally creatively destroy the others. This isn't fictitious. This is the stock value for Netflix and Blockbuster. There's nothing wrong with Blockbuster as a company. just 2002, Netflix comes along, offers a different competing and destructive product. Within 8 years, they're bankrupt. Fortune 500 company destroyed in 8 years off a little red button on your remote. Right? This is what we're dealing with. This is how I think hypercritical some of these discussions are from an economic competition strategy. What we're finding is we're not very good at predicting economic growth. We kind of stink at it. I mean, we used to count jobs, and you get the big ribbon cutting or high fives if 200 new jobs moved to the community. And it never seemed to materialize proportionate to those jobs. We didn't get that percentage of increase in the local GDP. We used to count curb cuts in industrial parks. That never seemed to be that predictive either. What we're finding is much more predictive is place attachment as an economic predictor. So if I surveyed this whole room and said, how many of you are willing and likely to promote Evansville as a place for a family or friend to come live? How many would say yes? Say 50. I won't even make you do it. Say 50%. If we can increase that number to 60%, we are likely to see a 10% increase in the GDP locally. It's much more predictive than jobs. Because when you get 200 new jobs, chances are those people don't even move. They just accept a horrible commute and not spend a dime in your community. So we have to understand this idea of place attachment, which brings with its own set of parameters. You increase place attachment with things like social offerings, openness, aesthetics. Right? This is why there was such an academic backlash to RFRA. From an economic term, we were perceived as an unopen community. Morals, religious beliefs, all that aside, you're talking about just dollars in a community. That's why it was such a big deal. And communities are starting to understand and leverage this. We already know it in our watching TV patterns. Almost every sitcom is based in a third place. Not a home, not a work, like the Cheers song, a place where everybody knows your name. Right? That's a third place. And this isn't by accident. Focus groups show time after time, we think this is a higher quality of life. We find this more interesting and aspiring to watch. All these storylines seem just slightly more absurd when they're based in a home, right, or in an office. Even though you know no one in Friends had a job, they never seemed to do anything. No one cared. I mean, it doesn't even really bother you, right? Even Office, the show Office is based at work, which isn't a third place, but you tell me one office that runs that way. So it's, so we understand this, we appreciate it, we just don't know how to get it. We don't know how to, just a normal lay citizen, I don't know how to demand a third place be moved within walking distance of my community. Right? That's a hard thing to, it's like the saying, I'm against picketing, but I don't know how to show it. Right? We just don't know what to do. The reason this is important is because, I don't know how to say this. I'm sure I'm going to offend somebody. Most communities are in a hyper-competitive race to attract emerging professionals because there's a myth that they have disposable time and money. Most of them have neither. Most of them have six-figure student loan debts and work more hours than they can afford to work. While I would never promote a community stop competing for that demographic, there's I think a real realistic argument that there's more to be gained in economic growth re-engaging the unengaged that already live in your community. People that through the environment, through life predicament, through a whole series of variables are no longer engaged in the world around them. This includes a large percentage of older adults, but also includes foster care. When they turn 18, they go off the radar. Low-income families, pre-driving teens, they all really struggle living independent lives in the communities we've given them to live in. If we can re-engage them, that's a captive demand just sitting there in our communities. Except this isn't a sexy demographic to go after. I mean, and to their defense, no mayor is winning an election saying this is what they're going to do. It's not. But we have to demand that people understand the importance of this. The reason I spend so much time thinking about rural communities is because it's the normative condition. While metro areas have an enormous amount of resources, planners, economists, policy providers, most of us throughout this country live in rural areas. Less than 25,000 people in a town. Most of us live in those types of environments. that have almost no resources. Some of them have part-time mayors. I have one client of mine that's a mayor / high school janitor. He's a better mayor than someone I know do it full-time. But you're just dealing with a different level of resources. But this is normal. You know, we have all kinds of great strategies about aging in place for Chicago. They don't need our help. These people do. And they probably need your expertise. We're seeing a huge influx of people threatening to move to rural areas. Most surveys say between 2010 and 2020, we're looking at about 200 residential moves of baby boomers leaving metro areas to go to rural communities. That's a lot of money. Right? That's a game changer for a town of 20,000 people. So how do you attract that without pandering to it? Right? How do you do that without being perceived as a retirement community? It's a challenge. The only thing saving us is I don't think anybody that's willing to do this, of this 200 million, picture retirement looking like that. They more picture this, right? And this was an AARP ad that I didn't doctor. So stop calling me senior if you want my business, which that's kind of been said. But the tagline is, I have money, I am loyal, I bring my friends. That's different. This idea that retirement includes my social network. And we're going to pick where we're going to hang out, and we're going to do it together. And we're nimble and mobile. We're going to find a spot that we like, shop it around like a book on Amazon, and purchase it, literally. This is a huge game changer for most rural communities. You're either going to win or lose this. There's probably not much gray area. And we need to understand how to tell that story and start to legitimately compete for this. This will phrase kind of where I come at this. This is my favorite definition of retirement. This is by Lowell Catlett. He's an economist from New Mexico. When I retire, I want to drink beer and work on my car all day long. I know I won't be able to drive the damn thing, but that's not the point. I've worked hard, and when I retire, that's what I want to do. So give me a garage, a fridge full of beer, and leave me alone. Sure, come in, change my diaper, make sure I have a pulse, but let me get back to changing my carburetor. And if you won't do it, I will pay for someone else to. And if I can't find anyone, I will find friends of mine who will build our own damn garage and hire 30 full-time nurses. This is what we're dealing with, right? This is the mentality that us as a community has to understand, right? And this isn't a baby boomer mentality. Millennials say the same thing. It has nothing to do with retirement. It has to do with the fact that people are starting to demand a certain level of quality of place. Right? And it's not just older adults. The difference is it's complex because we're dealing with things like happiness, which is a really nebulous thing to get your arms around. Because you're not dealing with facts. You know, a rational human is about the biggest oxymoron. We're dealing with perceptions, right? And that's what we're basing everything off. My brother's an economist. We deal in perceptions. We make purchases based on perceptions, not facts, right? Everything's a gut reaction, including where we live. And this idea of happiness got lost somewhere in the mix as a metric for whether or not people that are developing communities should be measured against. Right? Our goal in developing communities is to make people happy. Happy to live there, proud to live there, excited to stay there. That's our job. The problem is happiness is a really fickle thing because as there's a behavioral economist, Daniel Kahneman, he defines happiness in two ways. There's memory and experience, and the two tend to never get along. Right, but this is how your brain processes happiness. So you have a memory of an event, which may be very different than the actual experience of an event. Right? It could have been a horrible experience, but my memory is a lot different. Or my memory is as horrible and I actually didn't mind it. The two tend to never get along. But we make decisions based on these two fighting all the time. Right? So, thought experiment. If I tell each of you you have to take an amnesia pill before you decide where to take your family on vacation, would it change where you want to go? So everybody says no at first. And then they think about screaming children in the car, you know, the hotel lost, screwed up my reservation, got a flat tire in a rental. We don't pick where we want to go on vacation because of the experience. We're dictating a memory to our children. You're going to remember when you're 35 that we took you to a Florida beach and we had a wonderful time. I have pictures to prove it. Right? We want that memory in their memory bank. Many of us, we almost see that as our job as parents. Yes, you went to Disneyland. We have pictures. Now everybody shut up. And that's what we do, right? We don't make that decision based on experience. We never leave. And who's ever driven a car for 10 hours and went, that was really fun? So these aren't rational decisions. No different than we say, would you rather stay in your house as long as you want? It's not rational, right? We survey everybody that goes to retirement community. Almost all of them say, I wish I had done this earlier. Staying there oftentimes is not rational. But the memory of this place, I am not willing to let go of. My memory of this place is fantastic, right? My kids grew up here. My spouse used to be here. I'm not leaving. And we have to constantly battle those two things in economic terms. So this might be your memory of vacation. This could be your experience. I was just looking for an excuse to show that. And my argument is 20 years from now, both those families have the same memory. Right? They both had fun, they have a laughable story, but the important thing was they both went to the beach. Right? And that's what we have to accept. Happiness is an unrational thing that forces us to make decisions. The problem we're having, especially when it comes to community development, is this articulation of a new vision of later life, especially all the great things Dan was talking about this morning, are outpacing the construction of programs and institutions needed to realize that vision, meaning we don't have the built environment to produce or even foster active older adults. No more than we have to offer active 13-year-olds. Right? If you wouldn't let them leave the cul-de-sac in fear that they would get abducted, they stay and play video games. Right? So this isn't a question of older adults. This is a question of independence across the lifespan. And what we're finding is the appreciation and demand for that is much wider than the actual opportunity for it. And we have to understand how we can fill the gap. The biggest problem is we ask people what they want, which is real scary and dangerous. Because we don't know. Partly because memory and experience are having a fist fight, and partly because you just asked me a question I've never even thought about. And now you expect what's going to come out of my mouth next to be poetic? Right? We just kind of, you do these surveys, focus groups, I do them all the time. It's like, what do you want to be downtown Evansville? Go. IKEA. Great. And they write down IKEA. And then you vote on all this stuff that you're not going to get. Right? That's how it works. And that's how much thought's getting put into a lot of those focus group responses. It's not your fault. You didn't know what you were there for. Right? And when we were getting into those environments, we answer those questions in a really weird way. When you ask people what kind of coffee they drink, the majority of them say some version of dark, rich, hearty roast. Some version of that. That's 25% of the coffee sold in this country. Most of us like our coffee milky weak. Right? But that doesn't have the same ring to it when someone asks you how you like your coffee. Milky and weak. It just doesn't have the same vibe. And that's the problem, right? That's why Starbucks sells the darkest, richest, heartiest coffee in the world, so you can turn around and dump as much sugar, milk. The whole system's based on that, because they know that's why you're there. You're there so everyone sees you appreciating dark, rich, hearty roast coffee. Then you fix it behind you at the counter. Right? This is the system. The question is, why is it so important to drink dark, rich, harsh coffee? And why is it embarrassing to say milky and weak? Every time, my brother is 30 years old and he still drinks chocolate milk in restaurants. And whenever he orders it, someone giggles. But God love him, he loves chocolate milk. So those are cute examples. But when we ask people, would you live downtown? Yeah. Because I know right now I can't say no. It's too politically potent to say no. You can't be an anti-downtown person. They don't know anything about downtown. They might never have been downtown. But they know enough to know that the right answer is yes. And we constantly struggle with that. And asking people what they want in that framework is really dangerous. Whether it's older adults, teenagers. The question is, why did you think that was the right answer? Right? That's a better question. Why are we so scared to admit we love that? Right? Who doesn't like sugary coffee? And we need to understand that. And it permeates a whole series of discussions. So for instance, this is probably my favorite survey. So this is asking older adults a series of, I think, philosophical questions. The only difference is they segmented the participants into two groups. Dark yellow is those that self-identified as having a high level of engagement in the world around them. No empirical data. We didn't measure how many times they leave the house, how many volunteer hours they put in. We just asked, when you look in the mirror, would you admit in public you have a high level of engagement? Those with the dark yellow said yes. Those in the light yellow admitted to strangers, no. Okay? So think about this in terms of the coffee question. Right? These admittedly have a high level. And you ask questions like, are you satisfied with your life the majority of the time? 30% drop in those who will say yes, just in the low engagement adults. The question on the right is, do you have a high quality of life? 40% drop. And these are just the ones willing to say, I'm not engaged. This perception of engagement, independence, meaning, and belonging are extremely important in how someone perceives their quality of life. More importantly, it changes their behavior in the world around them. Where we live changes how we live, always has, always will. This guy, they posted this when I was on my way up to Michigan to do a charrette for a community on streetscapes. This gentleman does this every morning so he can go to the gym to exercise. Able-bodied guy, good guy. I talked to him. Now, in his defense, look beyond the car, what do you see? No sidewalks, no street furniture, no signage, no lighting, no people. This car was designed to drive a dog down. Literally. And that's the behavior you got. If he could take the dog to the gym with him, he would. Right? This has now become just an activity I got to get out of the way because I have no place to walk my dog. This is a design problem in some respects. It's also a acceptance problem on the other end. We accept environments like this all the time. We'll even accidentally call this a good neighborhood and not know why. Right? And we know we can't say it's a bad neighborhood because it's like saying I like my coffee milky and weak. It'll be offensive and awkward, and I don't want to deal with it. So it's a nice neighborhood, sure. It's quiet. That's what people will say. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood, meaning I haven't seen anybody in 7 years. That's the same thing, right? So we just need to understand that the language is different. And again, we know this when it comes to policing people, which is what's annoying to me. Every city has a broken window policy, meaning if you have graffiti, you have a zero tolerance for that, because more graffiti attracts more graffiti, attracts more graffiti. So most cities have a policy that has to be removed within 24 hours. There's a whole series of broken windows attract broken windows. Right? So you should fix it before more start littering with broken panes. Why we don't see this as a broken window is beyond me. How we can look at that and say, we keep doing this, we're going to do more of it. And it needs to stop. Right? Because this is a series of streets I drive my dog down. This is a nice, quiet neighborhood. Systematically designed to make sure I don't see anybody until I get into my garage and shut the door. These are the neighborhoods kids can't tell you where they live, or adults. This has to stop to some degree. And we have to have the sensibility and ammunition to say it needs to. We've known this for a long time. Look at things like Norks. naturally occurring retirement communities. I think the phrase started in the mid-'80s. And the nice thing about naming it is you can research it then. So when you move people and place them into NORCs, older adults, you see 84% participate in more activities, 95% know more about their communities. 70% said they felt healthier. We didn't change anything except we put them in a normal, decent neighborhood. Right? NORC is a euphemism for a nice place. Mayberry, NORC, right? This isn't rocket science. Most rural communities ask me, we can't pay you, but what should we do to our community? I said, find pictures of 1941. And we'll start there at least. Just go back to that, and then we'll fix it. This isn't complicated stuff. It's just a matter of prioritization. We're starting to get better at it. There's a thing called walkscore.com. Does everybody know walkscore? No? Go to walkscore. You can type in any address in the country. It'll give you a nominalized score 0 to 100 of how walkable it is. Okay? Realtors are catching on. A lot of national realtor websites now, you can compare houses when you're thinking about purchase. They'll have a walkscore app at the bottom. So yeah, they're the same price, and they both live in nice neighborhoods, except this one's in walking distance of a pub, a grocery, fresh produce, a market. Easy decision, right? We're also seeing that this results into real estate dollars. In 2009, CEO for Cities issued a report that said for every uptick in 1 point on WalkScore you got, residential property values went up $700 to $3,000 for every point. So we're starting to see the market appreciate this. AARP even has their own version now. They launched it in January called a livability index. Similar algorithm, you type in an address, it gives you a score. I get this argument a lot with rural communities in that they say they're too big and intimidating for older adults. These historic downtowns. Most of them in Indiana have 3 blocks, a ring of decent housing, and a ring of mistakes in the late 60s. And this idea of scale is what's intimidating to people. This is your average CCRC. This is the facility that was designed to accommodate older adults. The only difference is this one has spaghetti roads, mine are orthogonal. So if you look at the photo below, I can get from here to here in 2 blocks. If I'm here, the cul-de-sac actually did this. This is how I'd have to go to get to the dining hall if I was an independent resident. I'm not done. There. And they couldn't figure out for the life of them why people wouldn't walk to dinner. So it's not a question of scale. It's not a question of accessibility or even ADA. It's a question of comfort. It's easier to start in 40 acres of brownfield and just build something from scratch than deal with the complexities of a downtown urban setting. I get that, but that doesn't mean it's right. So I'm going to show some examples. How am I doing on time? Oh, okay. And what I want to show you is Sesame Street. Makes perfect sense, right? They just got Bob HBO today. You read the news this morning. This is my favorite example of an inclusionary system. So Sesame Street was designed to push education unwillingly and unknowingly down the throats of latchkey children. Right? Jim Henson's thought was all these poverty-stricken families, they lag in that summer break when they come back. They're gone for 3 months, but when they get back, they're 6 months behind. So can we use the television as a teaching tool? So they got a team of researchers from Stanford and said, here's how Sesame Street should look. It's a fantastic idea, except, by the way, you can't put adults on the screen at the same time as Muppets. They'll find that confusing. And a whole list of things in a report that Jim Henson read, said thank you, and threw it in the trash. What Jim did was he did time studies like Toyota. They had a concrete room, littered the floor with toys, put one tube television on the other end, and started playing pre-recorded segments of Sesame Street. And with a stopwatch timed what kids watched, when they lost interest and moved on to the toys, what got them back. You ever notice Oscar the Grouch doesn't teach you numbers and letters? He's comic relief. Kids found him too interesting. They don't retain a thing he says. But he has a purpose. When you see Oscar, you're resting without leaving. It's a big difference. Sesame Street's based on a cadence. The cadence of the intellectual integrity of a 4-year-old. So I have a 5- and a 6-year-old boy, so I know how this works. I can get you for 3 minutes, probably got to rest. I get you for another 3 minutes, probably got to rest. Now I got you for 5, probably rest. I'll hit you again with 3, probably rest. And then for the big close, I'll get you for 6. And you got to rest. That's how I get you for 20. Right? If I just shoved academic numbers and letters down your throat for 20, you leave pretty quick. So when you're seeing Oscar, that's the cadence. Okay? Walkability is the exact same way. American Planning Association defines walkability as 3/4 of a mile in 15 minutes. Most college students don't do that pace. Most college students aren't willing to do that pace. Okay? But most downtown residents, Chicago, Greenwich Village, they do that faster. Okay? There's a difference. If I'm in, I think Evansville is probably in this category. If I'm a realtor in downtown Evansville, I guarantee you I get this complaint that my customers can't park near my front door. That's why I'm going out of business. And we'll complain if we can't park to their front door. That's why I don't go there. Parking's horrible. In Chicago, if I park a mile away from Broadway show, I brag about that spot all the way home. Because that walk has more Oscars in it. Many more Oscars. In fact, that walk becomes part of the date. Sometimes your favorite part of the date. Right? Where a walk through a Walmart parking lot is not part of the date. Right? And there's not a damn Oscar in the whole parking lot. It's a very different walk. Right? So we have to understand that. What Sesame Street did is it made television sticky. Right? A science to stickiness. And what we have to do is make our communities understand the importance of neighborhoods that are sticky. So we can look at sticky networks like Village to Village, Aging and Home Services. All they're really doing is providing services to older adults as much as they can so they can go out and engage the world around them. They can stay stuck to their neighborhood. Right? But it doesn't stop there. There's sticky products. It's my favorite product. This is the Osco potato peeler, designed by lead designer Ideo for his arthritic grandmother. Remember the ones before this? That nasty metal handle that hurt your hand so bad? Now everything you buy in the kitchen section has this handle in it. This was not marketed as a geriatric kitchen utensil. That would have been branding suicide. It's the #1 selling product in wedding registries. If you're in the market for a potato peeler, this is the sexiest one they got. And that's the difference. It's a well-designed potato peeler. I'd argue that's what it is. It's not a geriatric kitchen utensil. It's just a well-designed product. And we need to design that out of our communities as well. Not geriatric neighborhoods, just well-designed neighborhoods. There's a big difference. There's sticky places. Everybody know Mather's Cafe? Please say yes. Show of hands. How many people know what Mather's Cafe is? Really? I was going to take this out of the presentation because I figured I'd be wasting my time. Okay, Mather's Cafe. This is what you're doing tonight. Go home and Google Mather's Cafe. They got videos on it. Greatest organization on the planet. What it is a senior center disguised as a Starbucks. The word senior appears nowhere. Staff is given a list of words they are not allowed to say, like senior. They call them people. Staff is also not incentivized by how good of a cup of soup they can make. They're incentivized by how many backstories they can memorize. Bob comes in every Tuesday. It's your job now to remember what Bob's name is, his new girlfriend's name, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what book he is reading. Carol comes in every Wednesday. You have to know everything about her too. And if Bob doesn't come in for more than 2 weeks, it's your job to convince Carol to go check on Bob. That's your job. By the way, make soup in your spare time. They sell soup by the temperature. If it's 5 degrees outside, it's 5 cents for a cup of soup. If it's negative 2 degrees outside, they pay you 2 cents to come eat soup. They don't make any money. It's run by Mather's Foundation. They're on the outskirts of downtown Chicago, and they are systematically reminding people and teaching people what it's like to live in a real neighborhood. Right? That's all we're talking about. trying to systematically remind people how nice it was, how convenient it really was to live in a real neighborhood. There's sticky maps. WalkScore was bought by Google, what made it extra cool. So now when you type in your address, you get maps. Green places are more sticky than red places, meaning they're more walkable. Okay? So I'm going to blow through this real quick, and I will stay back. I'll stay around to talk about it if anybody's interested. All I just said was about 3 or 4 years of research for our office. And what we did is we started developing a series of studies through the Pfizer Foundation grant to look at what we call lifetime community districts. And essentially what it was an overlay zoning district for municipalities to incentivize lifetime community strategies within a given geographic area. So in this area, X, we're only going to give subsidies and incentives if you behave this way as a developer. You have to start building things like their potato peelers. Right? We'll give you money to build Oscars. We're not going to give you a tax abatement to build a Taco Bell with a drive-through. It's not going to happen. So we started with a whole series of network structures, wellness indicators, and we turned these into development pattern strategies. It had 4 structures to it: living, buying, working, volunteering. We thought we could impact these 4 things with this effort. Housing's easy. Housing comes in any shape and size. It's just a matter of where they are in location and its proximity. Right? That's the easy one. Buying's a little different, but like Mather's Cafe, they offer training. They can teach any real retail establishment how to act more like Mather's. Right? That Mather's mentality of treating people like you know who they are. That it matters that you remember that it's their anniversary and they probably should buy something for their wife before they leave. Right? Every good bartender knows how to do this. Right? We just need to remember that, remind people and teach people. We've had Chamber of Commerce's offer this as a service for chamber members. Right? They'll teach their downtown businesses how to do this. And there's a science to it. Workforce, 93% of U.S.'s labor growth is age qualified. Right? So we do things like co-working. Everybody know do they have a co-working thing in Evansville? This is a cool way to fill up an empty storefront. Each one of these desks is a different company. I'm only renting it by half day or a day. And they have rules, like they won't let 2 architects have their own 2 companies, because then they form 1 company. But you share admin space, copiers, and you have a formal address with a business card. You're a real company. You're not working out of your house. What we've done is we try to incentivize older adult activities. So if you're 75 years old and still working and you were a retired CFO, I'll give you that desk for free. You don't have to pay us, but you got to give Billy 4 hours of time every week because he's starting a green tech company and doesn't know how to balance a checkbook. So not only are we subsidizing senior activity, we're leveraging intergenerational relationships. So pattern books often look like this. Most communities have some version of this. In the orange area, it has to be this far away from the street, and trees have to be here. In the yellow area, we'll do something a little different. In the green area, it's cuter, that kind of thing. We took a standard development pattern book and overlaid it and laced it with potato peeler technology. You have to be within 1,800 feet of fresh produce, because that's as far as a senior is willing to walk in 10 minutes. Don't cut it. Don't get an incentive. Don't know where fresh produce is? Go get some. Right? We had one developer say there was no fresh produce, so he started a produce stand. Treated it just like a lemonade stand. It was nothing. It wasn't anything. It was literally a lemonade stand. He had some vegetables in it, and we said, good enough. Now it's a farmer's market. Location caught on. People started to take ownership of it, and it became something. The strategies also defined what common issues are in development and started to define how the district would acknowledge those. And I can go, the PDF will be available. You can read all this stuff. But we were trying to define what common problems are and show how the district could solve some of those problems. We also showed in a lot of communities we were working in how these problems overlaid. So you can literally map systemic issues within a community. So like the gang line scenario, where beyond this point, people tend not to walk past the railroad tracks, or there's these boundaries. You start to overlay those, especially with available land, city-owned land, TIF districts, you can put together a pretty compelling package that will attract developers. Right. Here's what we can do. If you develop this area, you're not only going to allow access to fresh produce, but you'll be next to a trail system, and all these things that tell the story of livability is what a developer is the good ones are looking for. And they want the city to provide it. They can't pull that off. They can't pull off a trail system. They want you to get the land, the access, and the place, the attachment to it, and then they're in. This is a comprehensive plan for a town of 6,000 people. We used no nouns. Everything's verbs. This is where you do things. I don't care what it is. This is where we laugh, play, we're loud, we're quiet. And we started having a whole series of planning discussions around that. In Bloomington, we did a whole series of studies that define walkability in that 1,500-foot radius. And with those development patterns, we started to talk with developers about what happens when you extrapolate all the recommendations. What do you get? Well, along their Beeline Trail, you had a complete street initiative, which you all have, which is nothing more than a potato peeler as a street, right? But you also started getting these wonderful ideas that came out of the private market. This is what they call the Scholar House. It is affordable housing, it's HUD housing, voucher-based housing. The only difference is if you are a single mom going to school full or part-time, the daycare is free. Daycare was part of the project, and the whole hope is you're raising people out of poverty 2 generations at a time. But this doesn't happen without a system of support around it. You can't do this in a green field out in the middle of nowhere. We're not shy about saying these places should be places to be ornery, fun. That's what civic life was supposed to be about. A city wanted to do an ADA ramp on the side of a bridge, and they did an ADA ramp on the side of a bridge. So we said, well, I'll spend the same amount of money you are, and this is ADA compliant. So this is how we're getting ADA ramps down to the River Greenway. This is ADA compliant. It's a potato peeler. Right? This is Bloomington. This is what happens when you extrapolate all those recommendations along their Beeline Trail, which is like the Monon Trail in Indianapolis. There's $1 billion worth of square footage that could be potentially developed. I'm not saying it is or should. And all these buildings are nestled around these gray buildings, which are existing. We didn't tear down a single building. It's curved slightly so that there's closure to the vistas. The problem with most trails is you can look down it for probably a mile and know that there's no public restroom. And say, nah, I'll go somewhere else. So on here, every 1,800 feet is essentially a bookmobile with no wheels. The library agreed to do these little kind of community spaces. This one has a rock climbing wall on it because why not? But they offered to provide Wi-Fi along the trail as a hotspot, a collection of free books like a mini library, docking access for technology, and public restrooms. Now I got a trail. Right? Now I got a trail that most people will walk on. And a place, center of gravity for activity. So this is really where I spend most of my time, but I think it's where you spend most of your time as well. And the difference, I think, is only I've made up my mind that I'm not keeping my mouth shut. And I think this is an important issue for most of the communities we live and work in that without having this conversation, I think the results are, you can't hear me? Never had that said to me in my life. I think without having these conversations, the results are pretty dire. Because this isn't a zero-sum game. If you don't win this conversation, you dramatically lose it. And I think that has to be part of the discussion. And something I think a town like Evansville could really excel at. So I will stay as long as I need for questions. So I answer some right now. Anybody have it? Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Any? I know, now it's time for door prizes. Thank you.